The title of today's hearing is Walls and Waivers, Expedited Construction of the Southern Border Wall and Collateral Impacts on Communities and the Environments. The issue we are discussing today is enormously complex, and it involves immigration policy, security policy, economics, culture, history, budget policy, natural resource protection, and much more. To examine the history and the culture of the Southwest, to examine its fragile and unique ecosystems, to examine the economic and social factors influencing immigration, and to examine the pressing need for our national security, and then to decide the only policy solution is a 700-mile fence and a wall is simply a failure of leadership. This wall is an admission of defeat by this administration and the Congress in the face of an important public policy challenge. Likewise, to examine the myriad of laws which protect the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the people's right to know and to participate in the policy process, and then to decide that the only solution is to waive those laws completely is an abdication of our responsibility. Some might argue that the simple solutions are often the best, and generally I would agree. But our current approach to this issue is not simple, it's simplistic. And therefore, it is a disservice to the American people, who require, at this urgent time in our history, more than symbolic initiatives. Today's hearing will focus not only on the negative collateral impacts of the fragile southwestern environment, but also on the people and the economy of this area. However, because of the haste and the lack of foresight that has categorized this process so far, we will only scratch the surface of the real harms the proposed wall will cause.
That the federal government has a fundamental responsibility to secure our nation's borders. However, the methods by which our borders are secured and the manner by which the federal government implements this strategy are also fundamental to the public's acceptance and the government's success in meeting this responsibility. Our free and open system of representative government is built upon the tenets of public participation, robust debate, transparency, and public accountability in decision-making. Abiding by these tenets often can mean delays, extra costs, and at times legal challenges. But nonetheless, I believe that the only way our government can succeed and endure is if the people themselves feel vested in the important decisions that must affect their daily lives. We need to understand the practical implications of what it will mean to our communities and our environment to live on a daily basis with a border wall. This hearing serves as a forum for people finally to be heard by their government.
In the 1990s, we used fencing to secure the high-volume corridor in San Diego and El Paso, but we left the vast tracts of border vulnerable. The resulting shift of illegal alien activity to areas without fencing is now threatening to destroy fragile wildlife refuges and the treasured national monuments. The GAO found that illegal border activities, especially alien border crossings and drug smuggling on federal lands and tribal lands in the Southwest, have risen sharply since the mid-1990s, creating previously unforeseen problems for land management agencies, posing new dangers for law enforcement officers, visitors, employees, and the environment. Only 168 miles of the 370 miles of planned pedestrian fencing has been completed through March of 2008, along with 135 miles of the planned 300 miles of vehicle barriers. At the end of 2008, we will have 370 miles of border fencing on a 1,950-mile southwest border.
When we built that fence, we did it because the border was absolutely out of control. We had 300 drug trucks a month roaring across the border, loaded with cocaine and marijuana for America's kids. We had massive smuggling of illegal aliens. We had massive crime. In fact, we had criminal gangs that roamed the border and went back and forth, robbing and raping and murdering, an average of 10 to 11 murders a year in that deadly border area. When we built the double fence, we stopped all the drive-through drug smuggling cold. We stopped those 300 drug trucks a month. We put the border gangs out of business, and many of them were armed with automatic weapons because they lost their ability to move back and forth, and that's how they found their security. If they were pursued from the north by law enforcement, They would step south across the border. If they were pursued from the south by the Mexican law enforcement groups, they would step north across the border. When we put up the double border fence, we took away their mobility, and that put them out of business. We needed the fence. And in fact, my great friend Silver Reyes was one guy who came before a committee as a Border Patrol chief and testified in favor of the fence when we were having such a tough time getting it through in the 1990s. You know, I wrote the waiver language also that was inserted in the Real ID Act, and I want to tell you, Mr. Chairman, why I did that. The last piece of fence that we tried to build in San Diego was Smuggler's Gulch. That's a 4-mile stretch where cocaine and people continued to be smuggled after we built the rest of the double border fence. And we started to get sued by environmentalists. We then had a series of stalling actions, actions by the California Coastal Commission, by Fish and Wildlife, by other regulatory agencies, and by groups suing. And it took us 12 years to get that 4 miles of fence started at Smuggler's Gulch. And that, Mr. Chairman, is the reason why I wrote the waiver language that allows the Homeland Security Director, Mr. Chertoff, to make those waivers. He has had lots of mitigating actions that have been initiated for Fish and Wildlife. He's had hundreds of town meetings with people along the border, with groups, with office holders.
Probably 10% of the border needs to, we need to consider the potential for fencing. The fence is so high and so heavy that it's now splitting apart, and literally an individual can come through that fencing. Right now we're working on what we are calling the Merida Initiative. It's a window of opportunity to work with Mexico to help them with training and with equipment and also intelligence, communications equipment, so that they can work with our Border Patrol. The chief here and chiefs along the border should be consulted by DHS and by Congress about what works and what doesn't. If we were to do that, we wouldn't have to spend $50 billion on 700 miles border. We wouldn't have to spend money that we're going to go back and reinvest in maintenance. We just came from talking to the director of the Autobahn, and he had some people there from Seattle who told us that they're able to see the area, and they're able to enjoy the habitat that is better than even Central America. These are the things we're going to give up if we succumb to the fear. We need common sense is what we need. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And it's unfortunate that we have the fence being considered in the south, but not on the Canadian border. But where the concerned the tourists that supposedly came through the Canadian border, not through the Mexican border. Unfortunately, our laws are not made to help those that help our economy and that help us in the United States.
If my reading is correct about Secretary Chertoff, given the right to waive even the borders existing of the treaty relationship between Mexico and the United States, we have some very serious problems here.
We need to address illegal immigration, drug trafficking, and the violence that happens on our communities, both on the border and everywhere else in the United States of America. These problems, however, will not be solved by constructing a wall that tears through our public and historical lands, forces our citizens to surrender their property, and reverses all the work and investment the Congress and the local community have done to protect the natural environment. Right behind this building, we have a historic Fort Brown. It served as an integral battleground of the Mexican-American War, and troops stationed there fought in the last Civil War battle. The proposed border wall will put Fort Brown on the Mexican side. Will we put a wall to divide the battlefield at Gettysburg? The government is bullying citizens by not even giving them a fair market value on the lands it intends to seize. The funding for the wall and the process used to begin its construction is not, in my opinion, and the opinion of many people, is not a smart policy.